Hey Holston, some of you may know that this year we're celebrating 200 years of the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church. But that's not the only birthday that we're celebrating. It just so happens that today marks the 90th birthday of a good friend of the Holston Conference. So to celebrate that, Tim Jones and I took a trip down to Chattanooga and sat down with Bishop Richard Looney to talk about his history in Holston, what he's learned in his now 90 years of life, and the many decades of ministry that he was a part of here in the Holston Conference and beyond in the greater Southeastern jurisdiction. Please enjoy, take a look, and get some wisdom from Bishop Richard Looney.
Hey friends, I'm here with Bishop Looney. He's been so gracious to meet with us, and he's going to share some stories, and we've been so excited about getting together with him. And first thing I want to do, though, is we're sitting here on February 1st, 2024, and I heard a rumor that in 13 more days on Valentine's Day, which happens to be Ash Wednesday, somebody's getting a little bit older. You want to talk about that? And I'm not going to reveal any ages. I'll let you do that.
When you get old enough, you don't mind revealing your age. You're proud of it. I'll be celebrating my 90th birthday.
90th birthday. Wow.
I was born on February the 14th, premature.
Okay.
My mother had gone for a walk and fell on the ice, and I arrived a month early at 8.5 pounds. And I love to say, if I had been full term, I would have been a real man.
Man, full term, does that mean you'd be, what, 7'6" instead of 6'6"? Well, we're so thankful that you would take some time out and share some stories, and we're going to kind of run the gamut on different things. And you turn 90 this year, and Holston Conference turns 200 this year. And we're celebrating that bicentennial all throughout, but we'll have a special celebration in October. So if you could kick us off with, tell us some stories about Holston Conference.
Sure. I love Holston Conference. That's where I grew up. That's where I've had some great experiences. That's where I was taught and encouraged. I started off at Rising Fawn, Georgia, a 3-point rural circuit, still in the Holston Conference. It's in the Chattanooga district. We used to say that if you've got to 5 talents, they give you 5 churches. If you've got 3 talents, they give you 3 churches. If you've got 1 talent, they give you 1 church. If you don't have any talents, they make a district superintendent or a bishop out of you. Well, that's not so funny anymore. When I began my ministry, Jim Hankins and Sam Varnell were national leaders in the town and country movement, and they became my heroes and mentors. In fact, I became district secretary of town and country work, which Chattanooga is primarily an urban district. And the first time I appeared before the annual conference was at Brainerd, and I was scared to death. I reported on the work at Rising Fawn, which had been recognized as a circuit of the year or something. Holston helped me greatly appreciate missions. Holston's always been a mission-minded conference, sent a lot of work teams. We're pioneers in the Volunteers in Movement mission program. Mm-hmm. Helped me go to Peru, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. My first experience in Peru, the Peruvians are very short. And I got one of my favorite nicknames, which was Le Grand Hombre. And I said, hey, I like that Le Grand Hombre business. I had some wonderful bishops. Bishop Short started me out, ordained me. And it was like a spiritual shock when he laid hands on me in 1955 at my deacon's ordination. I sense a divine blessing or anointing or whatever. And I've always understood that what I was called to do was a rare privilege and an impossible job without help. Bishop Short was a saintly man, but he had a great sense of humor. He was to preach at Old Centenary Church before it became First Centenary. And he made his way across with an older woman he helped across the street, helped up the steps. And when he got to the top, she said, "I wonder who's preaching this morning." And in his modesty, he said, "Well, I understand the bishop is." She said, "Would you help me back down, please?" So I often used that in South Georgia to tell them I was glad they were there and keep listening if they didn't mind. Going back to the mission in Peru, I preached through an interpreter for the first time. And it was not a good experience because my interpreter was Japanese, had never interpreted before. And I finally gave up and just sang in English, and that communicated better. But later I heard a story I loved about an American preacher in Latin America who would speak 30 seconds, and the interpreter would speak 2 minutes. And finally he said, "Are you telling them what I'm telling you?" He said, "Oh, no, sir, I'm improving on it greatly." So I've always wanted an interpreter who would improve on it greatly. Bishop Allen was one of my favorites. He was sharp and handled the racial issue beautifully. He used to tell me, "Now, boy, I look up at you, not to you." And once he was disturbed because too many preachers were going back to do funerals and weddings where they'd been. And he said, "It amazes me that you young brethren only know how to minister to your people after you leave them." He said, "I can't forbid you to go back, but I can move you so far it'll be inconvenient." One of my favorite stories of Bishop Finger, he had an incredible memory. He could call you by name. And I met him in September when he became our bishop the first time in a line of about 700 people and introduced myself. The next month, there was an evangelism convocation in Atlanta. No pre-registration. So I showed up and I saw his eye across the sanctuary. Never did get to speak to him, and they announced that they would meet with their delegation, with their conference people that night. Well, I had a missionary friend back from the Congo, so I went to dinner with him. The next morning, they said, the layman that I went with said, "You're in trouble." I said, "What do you mean I'm in trouble?" He said, "Last night, the bishop went around the room and called the name of everybody there from the 3 annual conferences, Tennessee, Memphis, and Holston. And then he said, 'Where's Dick Looney? I saw him here this afternoon.'" Well, you can believe I never missed another meeting with Bishop Finger. Later, he was meeting with committees in the district where I served, at the church I served. And at lunch, I said, "Would you like to see the new baby?" Carolyn was from Mississippi.
Okay.
And so he said he would love to. So he came by. And Teresa was at school, but David and Jonathan, the new baby, were there. And the bishop had a beautiful prayer. I'm sure if he'd known he was going by the house, he would have remembered Teresa. But he prayed for David and Jonathan and Carolyn and Dick by name. And when he finished, David said, "You forgot Teresa." And the next year at conference, his sermon title was, "Don't Forget Teresa."
Wow.
Nobody knew what he was talking about, but I was glowing, to have a bishop who knew my name,
Yep.
ask about my children was a beautiful experience. We had a character in Holston called Ray Robinson, one of my best friends. He was a good preacher, superintendent, and a magnificent roaster. And he roasted our bishops as they left us. And I won't go into all the details, but when Bishop Useless left, he called him Bishop Useless instead of Bishop Usler. And he said, you know, that man is loved all over Holston Conference. So there's a couple in Chattanooga, one in Knoxville, and a couple up in Virginia. He said he's an eloquent preacher. Said I heard him 34 times, and both sermons were good. We had another bishop visiting who was lecturing on the Old Testament, and he roasted several bishops that night. And he said, Brother so-and-so, we're so glad to have you here to lecture on the Old Testament. Said, we now know what it is to be slain by the jawbone of an ass. Later, I went to Sierra Leone, and I spent the night of the week in a home of missionaries. And the first night, I had to sleep in a bed covered by a mosquito net. And I was later, when we did the program on malaria, and raised over $1 million, I realized what a wonderful reminder that Holston saved over 100,000 lives by this generous gift. We've had a part in the establishment of the university in Africa, Africa University. We've sent wonderful missionaries. My first Episcopal visit to a foreign work was in Malaysia. And Bob Lundy and Gunnar Tyman had served. And it was such a joy to be in churches dedicated to Bob Lundy and to remember all the folks who knew Gunnar Tyman. So Holston's had a wonderful past, and a wonderful present, and an exciting future. And I look forward to the fact that we will become what we're supposed to be, vital congregations reaching out in the name of Christ. So Holston, I salute you for giving me things to laugh about and wonderful churches to serve, and now the opportunity to share stories, which I could do if infinitum, but enough's enough.
All right, that's all you get from Bishop Looney this time, but we filmed so much more with him, as well as some of the other bishops who came out of Holston or who served here in Holston, and many other saints of the Holston Conference. So if you haven't already, subscribe here to the Rebrand Podcast YouTube channel for more bonus content just like this. Only more is going to come as we get ever closer to our bicentennial birthday here in Holston Conference.